Today we'll be discussing Bible translations. What's the difference between the translations? Why are there so many? And what is the difference between modern Bible translations and the King James Bible, for example? To begin this study, we need to acknowledge that there are 4 or 5 major topical areas that we need to touch on. The first being the objectives of Bible translations. Now, there are some 900 plus modern English Bible translations, partial translations, and so on. Is this about bringing you the most accurate and reliable translations, or is this about something else? I can assure you, it's not about producing the best translations. It's about copyright. That's correct. It's about profitability. All the modern Bibles are secured with a commercial copyright. And here's an interesting fact. There is only one Bible in the world today that does not have a commercial copyright. That is the King James Bible. It has a king's copyright, and they are very different. A king's copyright secures the document in a way that allows anyone to use it, to publish it, to republish it, and to spend their own money printing and distributing the Word of God. Only the King James Bible has a king's copyright. All the rest have commercial copyrights. A commercial copyright means if you want to republish the NIV, the RSV, the ESV, the Holman Christian Standard Bible, and whatever other Bible, you must seek the permission of the publisher or whoever owns the copyright, and you must pay royalties to that entity. Can you see the difference? There is an integrity issue already at the beginning of the idea of translating a Bible. When we look at the King James Bible and how it was translated, and we look at the modern Bible translations, we can see the reasons were very different. For example, with the King James Bible, an entire kingdom, the resources of the British Empire, were put at the disposal of the translators. They did not have the same restrictions. A modern Bible translation must operate within a limited budget. That was not the case with the King James Bible. Not only that, the very best scholars, 50 or more in the entire world, were employed for the task of the translation. That's not true with modern Bible translations. They simply can't afford to do that. So again, there are some fundamental reasons and objectives that these two opposing sets of translations come with. Now let's not forget, we're talking about one Bible, the King James Bible, the only one with a king's copyright, as opposed to 900 Bibles with commercial copyrights. Those 900 Bibles are all philosophically in opposition to the King James Bible. Next, the modern Bible translations claim to be translated from the oldest and therefore best manuscripts. But that's not true. They're not. And it's a false analogy to say that because something is oldest, it is best. But yet that's the myth that's been perpetrated. In fact, all the evidence points to the fact that the manuscript evidence for the modern Bibles is really a product of the 1800s. There was some fraud involved. and that's about the Sinaiticus and Tischendorf and the documents. How when he found them, the documents were white. When they finally got published years later, they were yellow, made to look old. That's a whole different study, and we don't want to get into that in detail right here. But it's sufficient to send up red flags that neither are they the best manuscripts, and neither are they the oldest manuscripts. There's some fraud involved. Now, the King James Bible comes from a different line of manuscripts, the majority texts. There's more than 4,000 documents. The minority texts, from which the modern Bible translations come, there's about 400. So it's a very narrow resource. And within that 400, many of them are fragments. And many of the documents have essential things missing, verses, chapters, and many of them demonstrate really poor and sloppy scholarship. So to make the claim that the modern translations come from the oldest and best manuscripts is not supported by the manuscript evidence. Now, the King James Bible, which is translated from the majority texts, or the Textus Receptus primarily, has 4,000 or more documents at its disposal. Now, the majority texts, or the Textus Receptus, traces its lineage back to Antioch. Antioch is where they were first called Christians. Read that in the book of Acts. And Stephen, in the first chapter of Acts, argues with the Alexandrians. He argues doctrine. The Alexandrians were Gnostics. They didn't believe in the deity of Christ, not in the same way. But that's where your minority texts come from. They're a product of the Alexandrian Gnostics. And those are compiled in something called Sinaiticus. And that collection, that omnibus, I guess you could say, is where you get the Westcott-Hort redaction, the Nestle-Aland redaction, and the UBS redactions. These are all products of the minority texts, which trace their lineage primarily back to the Gnostics in Alexandria. So you have 900 Bibles or more translated from that source. You have one Bible translated from the manuscripts that trace back to the Christians in Antioch. These are two very opposite theological positions. So when you combine that information with the idea and the knowledge that the King James Bible has a king's copyright, well, the modern Bible translations have commercial copyrights. Now herein lies the problem. If you want to publish a new translation and secure a copyright, you have to find new words. And I challenge you, out of 900 Bibles, how are you going to do that? 900 Bibles in the English language. You're going to come up with some really crazy stuff, and they do. Whereas the King James Bible, which precedes them all, didn't have that problem. They went after the best words, the best translations, the best representation of the text. But not only that, the King James translators did not ignore the Alexandrian texts. They knew them, and they carefully studied them, but they knew what didn't belong, and they tested everything against true doctrine. And so they used all the resources available, but they knew that the majority texts was the most secure place to establish true doctrine. And that's what they did. Now let's look at another aspect. The King James Bible has long been viewed by the secular world as a pinnacle in English literature, that it has a richness of expression, and on a poetic and prosaic level, many scholars say it has never been surpassed. You will never hear that said of any modern Bible translation. Think about that. So we have this pure objective to produce the most faithful translation. We don't have the constraints of budget and time, not in the same way as the modern translations. We have a better line of manuscripts, and we have more of them. This should be a no-brainer.